Story 1, Red Haw, Ohio. I've driven through it 4 times. Every single time it's the same story. Cars parked on the sides of the road, but no traffic. Doors wide open, but nobody visible. No music, no people. I legitimately saw a ball roll across the street once, and nobody could have thrown it. It looks like everyone who lives there disappears whenever I drive through, and then spontaneously they reappear when I leave. Story 2. I do not even know the name of it. Somewhere in Ohio. We stopped to have some dinner, and not feeling like fast food again, we went to a local restaurant instead. It was the only one around. The place was mostly empty tables except for one elderly couple and a big round table of maybe 10 people way in the back. Everyone went quiet when we walked in, and a few people actively stared. We waited by the door for a few minutes before an employee approached and told us their kitchen was super backed up and there was no way they could serve us. So, back to the highway for fast food it was. Story 3. Non-American went on the loneliest road in Nevada, and while not some creepy horror, it truly gave me a sense of scale for America as a place. In Europe, you simply cannot go that distance without encountering multiple massive cities. Where I live, every square centimeter of land has been apportioned for centuries, and then you go to Nevada and it's just open. And you have actual warnings telling you to fill up your car or else. Story 4. Not really a crazy cult, just a weird experience. I pulled into a bar in a tiny town in southeastern Missouri. The town was miles from any major highway. The bar was located in a former service station. There was only one other car in the parking lot, presumably the bartender's. I stepped inside, and there were 2 older men, one dressed in fishing gear, sitting at a table shelling peanuts. They both stopped and stared at me, and after an uncomfortably long pause, one of them asked if I needed something. I was hoping for a beer, I answered. One of them got up and got me a can of Miller Lite from the fridge. I would have sat at the bar, but the counter had a lot of boxes and clutter, along with an enormous plastic jar of some sort of dried mystery snack, and it just kind of seemed like they didn't want people sitting there. One table had hornets' nests on it. The other table, where the 2 men were sitting, was covered in peanut shells, fly swatters, squirt guns, and also a sledgehammer. I sat at the table with the hornet nests, but then the 2 men told me to come sit with them so that I wouldn't have to drink alone. I asked about the hornet nests, and the guy in the fishing gear, the same one who got me a beer, told me about how there's a short window you can collect them between when the hornets leave and when birds destroy them to eat the abandoned larvae. He mentioned that one time he cut one too soon, and before long the bar was swarming with hornets and it took a few days to get rid of them all. He then shook one of the nests over the table to show me all the larvae that fell out of it onto the table. They turned out to be really nice guys, and I actually had a good time visiting with them. But everything about the place was just weird. On the opposite side of the pool table, an entire wall and a good portion of the floor were covered with a pile of assorted children's toys. The men's bathroom set the all-time record for the dirtiest I have ever been in. It seemed to be rarely used and never cleaned. The sink was covered in rust and dust, and the toilet bowl was also somehow full of rust, and the splash zones were the cleanest part of the floor. Story 5. Not American, but a similar circumstance. I'm Welsh and live in South Wales. If I go to North Wales and enter a pub or bar, it's like that scene in a movie when some backpackers enter a village pub, and all its patrons stop what they are doing, put down their drinks, and stare at you. I had it happen in a place called Portdinlan. You'd think they'd recognize I am Welsh too, but nope, it was such a strange experience. It felt like I was in some hick backwoods kind of place I wasn't supposed to be. Story 6. We were on a road trip to visit family in another state and decided to take the long way to avoid turnpike fares, so we would have more opportunities to stop to feed our young baby. Besides, you usually end up seeing some nice scenery and find nice little towns along the way when you get off the turnpikes and take the back roads, right? Along the way, we needed to stop to feed the baby, and we saw a campground sign, so we thought that would be a neat place to stop since the sign said it had cabins, a lake, and a playground. We had our other young children with us, so this was a good place to take a break, have lunch, stretch our legs, and let the kids get out and run off some energy. We figured we might have to pay a small entrance fee to get in, but to our surprise, the campground owners allowed us to use the facilities and playground at no charge. And we thought ourselves fortunate to have come across such nice people. Such a happy accident. You are right to hear ominous music in your head at this point. We parked by the playground, took out our food, set ourselves up at a picnic table, had our lunch, and fed the baby. After we ate, the two older kids played on the playground equipment with the campground owner's grandkids. The campground owners, a husband and wife, both older, maybe in their 70s, stayed around and chatted with us, which we felt was nice because they were telling us about the area and the campground, and they seemed like very nice people. I watched the kids playing and just kind of half listened to their conversation, which went something like this. My kids, we're on a trip. Their grandkids. You're not leaving from here. My kids, puzzled looks. Yes, we are. We're just going to play for a while and then we're going. My mom said so. They're grandkids. No. My grandma said you're staying. Like the last people that came here. Now I'm curious. I'm sure they're just talking about people that come to camp here. My kids. No. We have to go. We're going to a hotel tonight with a pool. It has a slide. They're grandkids. No, you're not. People always stay. We make them. What? At this point, the owner's grandkids' voices are loud and insistent. I'm getting concerned because this is just getting weird. I tell my kids to come to the table to get cleaned up so we can leave because something just feels off, which they seem really happy to do because they're getting freaked out too. The campground owners seem to notice their grandkids have said something that triggered us and suddenly shift the conversation, starting to talk about how they have a church at the campground and everyone enjoys their services so much. They say we should stay. Why, there's a service that night, as a matter of fact, and they'd love to have us stay for it. They'd put us up in one of their cabins, give us dinner, and provide bedding. We said we appreciated the offer, but no thanks, we had to be going. They started insisting we stay, like really strongly insisting, almost beyond the point of politeness, almost to the point of bullying. Just very pushy, saying how it would be a shame if we drove when we were tired and got into an accident and something happened to the children, how we should really think of the children and their future and not put them in danger like that. I've never had anyone say anything like that to me before or since. I can't tell you how fast we packed up our things and left. To this day, I can't tell you exactly where it was, other than it was somewhere in West Virginia. I don't remember what area or town it was near. I've never tried to avoid the turnpike again. I'll gladly pay the turnpike fares anytime now. Maybe I was just overthinking it and they were just being very concerned, but when I think back on it, I still think they were just very, very weird people, and I'm glad we got out of there when we did. Story 7. Tonopah, Nevada. On the north end of the Tonopah Missile Range and Area 51. It's the beginning of nowhere and is home to the world's largest clown motel. The only reason to stop is for gas and to get out of there as quickly as possible. Story 8. Arco, Idaho. First town in the world to be fueled by nuclear power. They had an incident there in 1961. Stopped for gas on the way to craters of the Moon National Monument. Dust balls rolling across the streets. Desolate at the time. Little kid no more than 10 years old sitting on the floor in the gas station looking at magazines. Kid was the clerk's son. I jokingly told my buddy to get back in the car and lock the doors. We were fully expecting to see people with 3 arms. If you're from Arco, I'm certain it's a nice place. This was the late 90s and it was a boring weekday afternoon. So please don't be offended. Town was just a little eerie. Story 9. A Brit here, but when I was a visiting professor, I went on a road trip. My exhaust came loose as I climbed into the mountains out of Utah. I thought I could tie it up and make it back to Colorado, but a trooper pulled me over and told me to pull off the freeway at the next exit and get it fixed. I got off into this one-street town, and there was a hardware store with a rusted Model T Ford in the window, through which I could see one very old guy talking to a slightly younger one. I went in and asked if they were open, and they said, "No, we shut down 20 years ago, but how can we help you?" I said I needed some wire to tie my exhaust up, and the younger guy said he had some at his house down the street and could give me a ride to get it. British politeness insisted that I accept the serial killer's kind offer to help by taking me to his murder house rather than hurt his feelings. So I got in his truck, he gave me the wire, and did not use it to tie me up and kill me, for which I was grateful. It turned out he had returned to his old town to pack up his parents' house and was visiting the hardware store owner he used to work for as a high schooler. If I had been murdered, It would have been my just desserts for being such a dumb person who had apparently never learned a single lesson from any horror movie. Story 10. I'm Canadian, but we do road trips a lot too. In most small towns, if you go into the one diner or restaurant, especially if you're not off a main highway, everyone will look at you because they want to know who you are. Who's that? Is that Jack Fenton's son? No, Jack's son is on the rigs in Alberta. Couldn't be. Maybe he's one of the Gerhardts. Never seen a blonde Gerhardt before, and that's the sort of stuff they are talking about. Nothing sinister. They just want to know everyone. Story 11. The wife and I were driving through rural Alabama, where churches seem to outnumber homes, and most of those homes are trailers. We decided to stop for lunch at a diner in a small community. There were quite a few cars parked outside, including 2 police cruisers, so we figured it must be pretty popular. We walked in, and it was like a scene from a movie where everybody stops and turns to look at you, forks halfway to mouths, words half spoken. It went totally silent, and never in my life have I felt so spooked, so unsettled, and the wife felt the same. We turned around, got back in our car, and left as fast as possible. Story 12. The area around the Salton Sea in Southern California, particularly the upper half of the Western Shore, includes towns like Salton City, Desert Shores, and Oasis. None of them had cult vibes. I actually quite enjoyed the people there. Back in the 1960s, a number of resort towns appeared along the sea. In the 1980s, agricultural runoff severely polluted the sea. There were also wild variations in the salinity of the sea, and those 2 factors combined to kill off many of the sea's fish. The dead fish washed up on shore, the sight and smell of which pretty much ended the tourism industry. What remains is an ecological disaster and a number of towns that are not quite ghost towns. It's a really eerie corner of the world, and as someone who has spent a lot of time in small towns across the western states, the Salton Sea area is definitely unique in my memory. Story 13. I once was on a road trip from South Dakota to Pennsylvania. I stopped off the interstate in some small Wisconsin town to use the restroom inside a small bar. Every inch of that bathroom was covered in the most disgusting racist graffiti you can imagine. I've never seen anything like it before or since. Story 14. We detoured through Vidor, Texas, due to a road closure. The residents hung white sheets saying, "Don't stop," and "Go that way." They seemed to have lots of white sheets. Story 15. One time, my partner and I were driving through the absolute middle of nowhere in upstate New York. It's getting dark. There's snow on the ground. It's creepy enough. Then a deer slowly walks in front of our car. I slow down and stop. It stops, turns its head fully to look at us. The entire other half of its face was shredded. Just strips of raw red flesh hanging off. The scream we screamed. Story 16. Harrison, Arkansas has billboards for white power radio. I had heard about it on the internet but had forgotten until some friends and I went camping on the Buffalo River. It's 100% legitimate. Story 17. About 20 years ago, my car overheated in South Carolina. I pulled off the highway and ended up on a dirt road in the middle of some farm fields before I decided the car couldn't go any further without permanent damage to the engine. A friendly local in a pickup truck with a giant Confederate flag mounted to the truck bed promptly stopped by to ask me if I needed help. I told him it was appreciated, but the American Automobile Association was on the way. He then asked me if I wanted him to keep me company while I waited, showed me his shotgun, and told me there were a lot of people darker than blue around. He used a little more colorful and offensive language than that. I kindly rescinded the offer, but thought, holy hell, I'm in deliverance right now. The tow truck arrived, the driver was a normal person, we had a good conversation, but then when we got into town, it looked about as run down as the slums in Kinshasa. There were stray dogs everywhere. Large groups of people gathered along the street not doing anything, looking like zombies, broken windows, stripped down cars, and garbage everywhere. The minute I got out of the tow truck, I felt like everyone was looking at me. I've been in some of the roughest neighborhoods of the Midwest, but this was another level. Every inch of my existence was telling me to get out. Needless to say, I paid to get my car towed to Columbia. Story 18. Not a town, but there is a little back road in Georgia named Trail of Tears Road. My wife and I drove on it, and it was a beautiful sunny day when we made the turn. As soon as we were on the road, it started raining, and the weather got worse and worse until it was like driving in a hurricane. Then, as soon as we got to the end of the road and turned onto the highway, the skies cleared up and it was a beautiful sunny day again. Super weird experience, and now years later, when strange things happen in the world, we joke with each other that it's all a dream and we're still trapped on Trail of Tears Road.